Hi everyone, welcome, thank you so much for coming on this very busy and controversial election day. This is the penultimate talk in this series and we're thrilled to have John Kennedy here and have Nigel Redden here who's going to introduce John in a minute. I know there are some new people here, so I just wanted to explain briefly. Well, to start off with, clearly the Spoleto Festival is one of the most life-enhancing events that goes on in the year in Charleston. So we at the Library Society definitely wanted to support it, pay tribute to it, hang on its coattails, whatever you want to call it. And so we've had a Spoleto event at each year of the series. We started actually with Nigel Redden himself, who gave a fascinating talk. And then we've always tried to partner with the event that maybe is one of the richest in the programme at Spoleto, that has the most discussion material or is a little bit esoteric. And Paula Edwards, the marketing and publicity director of the festival, has been an amazing help in choosing the piece and persuading the director or conductor or whoever to take part in this. I'm very grateful to Paula. Other thing I wanted to say is that, in fact, Spoleto sort of was a role model for this series, because many of you will be great fans of the chamber music series, and it's something that I think people know is going to be a high-quality program, and they will sign up for almost without knowing what the roster of pieces and musicians is going to be. I think only very recently did the festival start to give people the program in advance. And similarly, I say with Wide Angle, come be in this space for an hour in the middle of your day, have your lunch, listen to something mind-opening, and put your mind in a different space for an hour and go away refreshed and revived for your busy day. And so yes, very much what the chamber music achieves, and in our small way we hope we do the same. So I'd love to hand over to Nigel now to introduce John Kennedy.
Thank you, Carol. It's a real pleasure to be here. One, I think this is the best library. It's such a wonderful space. I mean, it really conjures up what a library should be. So I always like being here. And in fact, one of the things that I should say is this year we also have a series of conversations during the festival that are going to be here. And we're thrilled that the library has invited us here. But I'm particularly happy to introduce John. And my connection to John goes back to when he was about 18. It actually does. I worked closely with John's father when I was in Minneapolis, and he was, Wally was a great colleague, and someone that was a real pleasure to work with over the 6 years that I was there. But I didn't know John at the time. He had already left Minneapolis thinking that it was perhaps too cold, and he was already in college, but when I came to the festival in 1986, John had already been here for 3 years. So this is, in fact, John's 30th year with Spoleto Festival USA, so he's a bit of a lifer. He began as a percussionist in our orchestra, and then, most orchestra members don't do this, but he came to me and to someone else that I was working with, Carmen Covens, and said, you know, you really should change the program a bit, and you're not doing enough contemporary music. So he started a contemporary music, well, so he said, okay, you started. So he started a contemporary music series, which was called 20th Century Perspectives. For obvious reasons, it's now called Music in Time, because we couldn't keep changing the name every century. But over the years, I've also seen how he's grown as an artist. He obviously has had a wonderful musical education, but he's become a very accomplished composer and an accomplished conductor. He's conducted a number of new operas that we've done over the last 3 or 4 years. Faustus the Last Night, Pascal Dussepin's wonderful opera. Last year he conducted Kepler by Philip Glass, and there's one other that has escaped. Emily, okay. Yeah, sorry. You know, clearly I need notes. But this year he is conducting Matsukaze, which we're doing at the Dock Street Theatre, which is an opera by Toshio Hosokawa, which I'm sure he will tell you more about. But the other thing that John does is put together our orchestra. This is an extremely complicated thing to do. He auditions 600 musicians every year, and putting an orchestra together means being able to keep people's sound in your ears. And maybe he will explain how he does it. I personally don't. I know I couldn't do it. But the orchestra is part of the reason that Spoleto Festival USA works. It's an orchestra made up of young professionals who come to Charleston with a tremendous enthusiasm about performing music. And that is not something that every orchestra has. And they come here only for Spoleto Festival USA, so that they have a kind of energy about them that is infectious and absolutely is part of the success of the festival. So John is an essential element of the festival. He's recently become our resident conductor and our director of orchestral activities. So please welcome John.
Thank you so much. Well, through that introduction, you gather my history here, and it's just so wonderful to be back in Charleston, because through my years here, I came here in 1983 as a percussionist in the orchestra. And actually, it's not technically my 30th year with the festival, because I missed a couple of festivals in there. But I have really felt and developed a relationship with this city where it feels like a second home to me. And it's certainly been my artistic home in so many ways in terms of my own evolution as an artist. You know, I was always a percussionist and a student of composition and composing when I was younger. And then in leading a contemporary music group in New York, I began to conduct, and one thing led to another, and yet I've always had this wonderful association with Spoleto and a love affair with this city. What we do and what we conjure up every spring is not just what we put on our stages, of course. It's what the festival's identity is so very much integrated with Charleston as a city, as a place, the ambiance here, the relationship we have with our audiences, the people, those of you who invite artists into your homes and host parties and things like this. Because the overall experience that we all have, artists and audience, everyone together, is very much about, it leaves the stages and it goes into the city. It's such a wonderful place to be able to do our work as artists. I meet so many artists who have been to the festival, whether it was just once with a dance company, or maybe they came 5 or 6 years in the chamber music series. And if they speak so enthusiastically of Spoleto, I've never met anyone who had a bad time coming to Charleston, you know, and wistfully. And so I'm very fortunate to be a lifer. I love it. And we continue to see how the festival changes, you know, and the city changes, and each festival has its own different kind of dynamic of what we present and how it's received, and it all becomes part of the fabric of what happens here, and it's exciting. And yeah, today's election day, my goodness. I mean, you know, sometimes being from afar, I read the Post and Courier when I can. I live in the Bay Area. And, you know, not just in South Carolina, but I grew up in Minnesota, which has had its own share of political theater. And anyway, all this to say, you know, there's always political theater going on in the world, but now we have time to have some real theater on our stages. So, looking forward to the festival. Matsukaze. It's an opera by the Japanese composer Toshio Hosokawa. And it's not a name you should know. Very few people, even in the music world, know Toshio's work. His music has only been played a little bit in the United States, and for the first time at our festival last spring. In Japan, he is now regarded as perhaps the great senior composer of Japan. although he's just in his 50s. And his work is a real melding of cultures, and that can be sort of an easy thing to say about almost any composer today. Even a Western composer often composes music that is a melding of cultures, as all of us around the world have become more global. But Hosokawa studied in Germany and has lived much of his life in Germany. And so he learned and adopted many of the languages of contemporary European music. What's incredibly refreshing about his work is that he uses what might be called, modernism or postmodernism, whatever kind of ways of thinking about it. He uses it as part of his vocabulary and his skill set to still express his own fundamental aesthetics, which are very much Japanese. He doesn't use composition as a technical resource to make you listen. And if there's some stereotypes that we could allude to in how many people in listening to particularly new music from composers of the Western tradition now, coming especially from Europe, some of it can be very challenging orally. And a lot of that is because the composer is so focused on music almost as a laboratory exercise, and not perhaps having, as an artist, the same kind of aesthetic intelligence that we really get from great artists. I believe that composers who really endure, from Bach, Beethoven, through Brahms and Stravinsky, and into the present, are those who aren't just great composers, who don't just know how to paint a beautiful oral canvas, but also have what you might call aesthetic intelligence. And Hosokawa really has that. I think, I'll get into the opera, I'm sorry. But what he does, he's spoken very clearly about trying to use his technical capacity, or whatever you want to call it, in creating soundscapes and beautiful sonorities. He really believes that for him it's an expression of his own sense of being Japanese and of his Buddhism. And in this particular opera, he's entered a phase of his career that he's very open about, where he is really trying to focus his composition on expressing something that's authentically within his own spiritual perspective. And so let's talk about the opera a little bit, so we can then sort of relate that to what you'll hear when you hear the opera. Matsukaze is a traditional Japanese story in the No tradition, N-O-H. Several hundred years old classical drama in Japan. And these stories are often like parables in telling a story of a drama that tells something to us about our spiritual or personal journey. And traditionally, a No drama might last all day long. And what's fascinating about it, too, is that everyone involved in it, the actors and the musicians, they each have their own role, which they study very explicitly with a master in that particular discipline. But then the rehearsal to prepare a traditional No drama happens only once, several days before a performance. And then when the actual drama happens, they see what happens. And that's and part of it is that everybody understands everything about it. And so in each incarnation, it has its own brand new occurrence. And what this particular story is, Matsukaze, it's about two sisters, Matsukaze and Murasame, and they are spirits. Matsukaze means wind in the pines, and Murasame is autumn rain. And at the beginning of the story, a monk is walking along the coast of Suma, which is on the inner Japanese Sea, and near Kobe. and he's on an annual pilgrimage in his role as a monk. And he comes upon a pine tree on the coast, an evergreen, and he sees that there's a memorial there. And a fisherman who's on the coast explains what the memorial is. It's a grave site of these two sisters, Matsukaze and Murasame, who many, many years ago fell in love here with a man from the city, the capital, named Yukihira. And he was an official, he was an important person, but he also was sort of a poet too. And they had a very short, intense period of love. And then he left them and went back to the city. And they heard through the grapevine some days later that he had died. And they died in their grief. So the monk hears this story from the fisherman heads off for the night, and the monk says, "I think I'll sleep here." He goes to sleep, and then over the next arc of the opera, the sisters appear to him as spirits and tell him their story and about their love for Yukihira, about how in one evening he made them both women, and they continue to sing of their longing. And over the course of their time there with the monk, whether it's a dream or whether they really come to him, particularly Matsukaze goes mad. She thinks that she sees Yukihira in the pine tree. And then they disappear. The monk wakes up and he goes on his way. And, you will take from it what you will. There are many different interpretations, of course, but there's a real love of the natural world and what individuals represent. The moonlight is almost like a character in the opera. So is the sound of water. And the sisters, their love really represents much more than something as simple as love of a man or love of being loved. It's about fulfillment. It's certainly within the Buddhist tradition, which I'm not an expert on. It's about a desire and attachment, which one has to be careful about avoiding in life, attachments and vanity in that way, and finding one's own sort of inner nature in relation to the universe. And the libretto, which is very beautiful, explores all those things with a lot of subtlety. So it's really a beautiful story, and musically, what Hosokawa does, he's not recreating a no drama at all. This is something I have to explain to people. People ask me, well, is he using the traditional play and text and everything? And it's like, no, he has a German librettist who wrote a new libretto, as if someone today were taking any story from our own tradition, whether it would be Hansel and Gretel or Little Women or something. It's a new work. It's a brand new discrete work. And Hosokawa's take on it is nonetheless evocative of no theater, because the opera does move at a very slow pace. But that slow pace is filled. The space itself creates, the slowness of it, the quietness of it, creates space for a lot to happen. And for us as an audience member to appreciate both time and sort of emotional development in different ways. And so, for instance, I'll tell you a little bit about the mechanics of it. A second, one, tick, tick. That's like 60 beats per minute, right? That's common tempo in music, a slow, nice slow tempo. Well, this opera, much of it is at 40 beats per minute, slower than the human heartbeat. So, 2, 3, immense space is created in which you just hear very soft waves of sound. Yeah? The fastest tempo in the opera is just a little bit more than 1 beat per minute, 64, like. That's like the fastest the opera ever moves. And within that, he uses musical motives and melodies like weather, if you will, like the lapping of waves. You know that sound? There's a periodicity to the wave hitting the seashore that's so calming and beautiful, but it's never like a metronome. You know, it changes just a little bit, right? And each time, and Hosokawa has composed his music that way, so that there will be a motive, a beautiful little melody in the oboe, for instance, or clarinet, that happens in little aperiodic cycles that come back. And the music, and the opera uses musical material in very beautiful, repetitive ways. And it creates this wide open space in which you really feel and hopefully smell and sense the ocean. The vocal writing, as you can imagine, perhaps, it's challenging for singers to sustain a kind of intensity at tempi that are like that, but they can, and his composing is brilliant. I mean, it completely works. He's not asking anything of them that's unreasonable, for instance, in terms of their own breath. And we have in our cast, it's a wonderful cast of people. We have 2 young Korean women. Purim Jo is singing the title role of Matsukaze, and Ji-hee Kim is singing Murasame. They look like they could be sisters, and they have youthful voices that are nonetheless very strong and big voices. And I think both of these young ladies are going to have really big opera careers. This is a moment in Charleston where we've taken a risk on people who are less experienced in some respects, but who are very perfect in a particular artistic capacity of this opera. And it's very exciting. You know, our casting director is Lenore Rosenberg from the Metropolitan Opera. She knows all the singers out there. And if she believes in them too, as I do, you know, we're in good hands. And it's exciting. I mean, I encourage you to hear the opera, if for no other reason then you can then say, I heard them when, you know. Purim in particular is going to be, you know, she'll be a Traviata someday, for instance. Anyway, so the opera, it has also within it what I think is one of the great entrances in opera history, which is the beginning of Scene 2 when the sisters awaken from the past or the dead. And you have the entrance of these 2 spirits. And he's composed the most beautiful vocal duet. You know, you might be familiar like with the very famous duet from Lakme, which like is used on airplane commercials. Right? So, I mean, this is doesn't move that fast, but it's the same idea of 2 sopranos, a high soprano, a slightly lower soprano. And they enter at perfect fifths together, a very consonant interval. And they sing in the most flowery, beautiful, warm way. And it's the coming to life of these spirits. And I think it's one of the most spine-tingling moments in opera. And it's a brand new opera, and it's only been around for 2 years. And then there's also a mad scene and a dance where Matsukaze loses her mind in her love and pining for Yukihira. A really neat thing that's a fabulous coincidence between Japanese and English is that pine also has a dual meaning in Japanese. It's an evergreen tree, and it also means to long deeply, to pine for someone. And Matsu in Japanese is a pine tree, and then a variation on that is to pine. And it's interesting, I mean, culturally, that from different parts of the world, people have recognized the pine tree as a symbol of hope, of being evergreen. So, anyway, I think it's a magical piece, a really magical piece. Our director, Chenji Zhang, has been here at Spoleto before. He did the Peony Pavilion, the traditional Chinese opera. He also did Flying Dutchman many years ago. And he is someone who is fantastic at really melding the traditional and the contemporary, as this composer is doing. So to us, he seemed a very natural and exciting choice. And the production is going to rely in its design very much on the symbolism that exists in the tradition of no drama. These characters are somewhat symbolic. They're not as much people as they are characters of human nature. And you know, the pine tree is going to be abstract. The salt house where the monk spends the night will be kind of abstract. But it will all be very clear nonetheless. And so, you know, both in mixing West and East and in old and new, I think this is a really, really exciting production, and I hope you'll come for it. The other thing I've been asked to talk about a little bit is the festival orchestra and the audition process and all that sort of thing. You know, I played in it myself. The funny thing is, I was in grad school, percussionist. I was having a great time in grad school. I was living in Chicago at the time, attending Northwestern and doing a secondary degree in composition. And I was having the time of my life. I was playing extra with the Chicago Symphony under people like Scholke and Abato. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do a summer festival, you know. And a friend of mine encouraged me to audition, so I auditioned. I was an alternate. I didn't get in. And then about 3 weeks before the festival started, I got a phone call from a woman named Erika Gastelli, and she left a message on my voicemail inviting me to the festival, and the rest is history. You know? And so, anyway, I understand what it's like to play in an orchestra. I started out that way, and in fact, most conductors will tell you a story of that they were once an instrumentalist of some kind, and played in orchestras when they were young. It's a transition many people make. And in any case, what we do each year, it's always a new orchestra, but we open it up as a program that people audition for. And within sort of an ecology that exists of other summer festivals in the United States, such as Tanglewood. There's the Colorado Music Festival, which is one of our competitors, except it starts after us, and Music Academy of the West, and then a number of festivals in Europe as well, in which young musicians who are hoping for careers in orchestras audition for these programs. And we go to 10 cities, including Charleston, and visit those that have the strongest music schools, the obvious places like New York, Boston, and Cleveland. We go to Miami, where there is the New World Symphony, which is regarded as America's orchestral academy that was started by Michael Tilson Thomas. It's a fabulous orchestra. And these are people who usually have graduate degrees already, and that orchestra was started as a way of keeping them employed and growing. There's all these amazing graduate students coming out of school ready to be a professional musician in an orchestra, but there just aren't enough jobs. And so the New World Symphony exists as a place for people to even reach the age of their early 30s and continue their development. It's actually been really vital to the health of orchestras in our country that way. We get a lot of people from there. And what's interesting is that through the process, you know, we form an orchestra that has its own character each year. we're at the point now where every year we have more alumni audition than actual spaces in the orchestra. So no one's guaranteed a chance to come back. I think most people understand that and know that each year is different. And for instance, with the New World Symphony, which is as competitive as it is, about 85% of their people auditioned for us this year, and we were only able to accept about 35% of them. So that's how competitive it is. And, you know, what I have to listen for, which Nigel alluded to, is that is sound and the ability to be versatile in many different kinds of repertoire. Because here at Spoleto, you know, we do orchestral programs, but we also, the things that the musicians in the orchestra are most involved in terms of the amount of rehearsal they do and performances they do, are the operas. And then they're involved as well in some chamber music or intermezzi concerts usually too, and sometimes the music in time. So it's not enough that one can necessarily play an excerpt from Mozart's 40th Symphony really well. They have to have be multi-talented and versatile in a variety of repertoire. And you know, I also have to judge in the audition process, and this is why I do it every year, is character and personality. It makes all the difference in the world. If we were a full-time professional orchestra like the Metropolitan Opera, they hold their auditions behind screens. And then, you know, that was instituted in the 1970s to avoid sexism, you know, that women would have an equal chance at winning a job. And it really served an amazing purpose. All of a sudden, all the auditions at the Met were being won by women. But, but it also meant that sometimes you hire someone who no one gets along with, you know. But orchestras have a way of resolving that, however they do. But in our case, with the circumstance of this being a very short, intense period, the orchestra comes for 4 weeks. Just 2 weeks before the festival opens, we put everything together. And many of them have never played together before, in spite of the fact that we'll have like about 60% alumni, that other 40% is brand new. And so, you know, many things have to be accomplished, working with different conductors, working with different repertoire. And so what I hear in January and February in the auditions becomes the basis of a lot of decisions, musical decisions, that we then institute in the festival. So, you know, that's sort of how it happens, and the orchestra members themselves are almost exclusively graduate students or postgraduate, you know, in their mid to late 20s. There's the occasional undergrad on violin, but it's very hard for undergrads to get in these days. And we actually don't hear very many of them. So, you know, we can't just accept somebody's friend or nephew. It's not like that. My sister keeps telling me about this amazing cellist. He's not ready. He might be ready in 5 years. But anyway. You know, within the larger picture now of the music world, the classical music world, I mean, we all know about some of the issues that many orchestras around the country and world are facing. The climate has changed in terms of audiences and what certain orchestras feel that they can sustain financially and into the future. And you've experienced in Charleston. I'm glad to hear that the Charleston Symphony sounds like it's getting in a much better place. But, you know, I have colleagues in the Minnesota Orchestra, which is almost on the precipice of falling apart. And, you know, it was one of the greatest orchestras in the United States for many, many years, and it just seems such an affront to the generations of people who built that orchestra and gave to it that it's gotten to this point. But, you know, these young people who come here to play here, they are pining for a life in music, you know? And they come and really play in the most dedicated way. And I think that they're aspiring for permanence, a way to express themselves in music. I saw on Facebook last night that one of the violists who came here this year just won yesterday the assistant principal viola chair of the Richmond, Virginia Symphony. And so she's ecstatic. But in perspective, that's going to be a very humble job. And she's going to have to do a lot of teaching to earn a living. And what will happen in the future for this generation of young musicians who are coming of age is that they're going to find themselves having to be very flexible in the kinds of work they do, in knowing that you won't just win a job in an orchestra and play in that orchestra forever, because it seems fragile now. And those of us who are patrons and lovers of the arts, we have to do all we can in the right circumstances to support those kinds of institutions. But at the same time, this generation of musicians coming of age, they're going to be called upon to be very intelligent and do a wide variety of musical work. And you'll see in this year's festival that we have people like that here. There will be a clarinetist featured on the Music in Time series who's a brilliant composer, really strong composer, and he plays clarinet, at a very high level. He was at the Verbier Festival last year in Switzerland. And I've given the orchestra members a hand in designing some of the programs a little bit on the Intermezzo series and the Music in Time series. And one program on each series, they gave their ideas to me on repertoire they were interested in doing. And so this is a chance for them to not only show their artistry, but also their intelligence, if you will. And it's what they're going to need in the opportunities they find for themselves in the future. That the artistic impulse, which I've had the luxury of asserting here at Spoleto, is something that they're going to have to do too. You don't just sit and play and wait for the phone to ring. And it gives people an opportunity to evolve artistically. So, anyway, it's a real pleasure to be back, and I hope you'll come to Matsukaze, among other things, and we'll enjoy that.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sure. Are there questions? Yeah. Yes?
After your auditions in January and February, is that correct? When do you first congregate as a group to rehearse, since these people are from all over?
That will be May 12th when they get, or no, the 14th of May. The 14th of May when they get here. Yeah. Is that a week from today? Yeah. Yeah, they, our orchestra manager sent out invitations about March 1st, so people knew. It takes a while for that to all settle of who's actually going to come. And then for certain select repertoire that's very difficult, they know in advance what they're playing. But for most things, they're just going to show up and pick up their music. Yes?
Am I right that the libretto is in German?
It is in German. I should have mentioned this, yeah. We thought about asking the composer for a version in English. It's always sort of a question when you present a new opera in a foreign language in an English-speaking country. And in this case, he said no, he wants it to be in German. And now that I'm living with it and knowing it, I completely understand why he feels that way. He uses German so beautifully. And there's a chunkiness to German that is used in terms of the sound, other sounds in the opera, the sound of wind and rain, and then there's a lyricism to the vowels that's dark, right? It's different than French or Italian, and that darkness really works in this story. I don't think you're going to sacrifice anything, because even if it were in English, we would still project super titles. And I would encourage you to listen to the German like like it's, as part of the texture. It's not just words, but it's also part of the musical texture.
I wonder, I mean, German obviously has a legacy because it's been used for centuries, because that's where the great composers came from, and so it brings with it extra meaning in each word. But why has English not really caught on as a language of opera as much as one might expect?
Well, I think that's more about the history of opera, in the sense that there wasn't really a great composer, English-speaking composer of opera until Benjamin Britten came along, perhaps. Some would argue otherwise. But in terms of really reaching into the repertoire and being done a lot. Yeah? And in the United States, I mean, as a younger country that came of age artistically really in the 20th century, there aren't many great American composers that are part of our cultural heritage from the 19th century, And so, from the golden age of opera, if you will. And so, but I think more and more, we are seeing excellent English language operas. So, it's always different to hear it in English, too. Nothing sounds quite right. That may be the composer more than the language. Yes? Well, I'm going to have to share your ignorance because Kabuki is more recent. I mean, Nigel, would you want to address that?
Kabuki started as a popular art form, and No was very much a religious art form, and it was part of religious festivals. And Kabuki actually started on a dry river bed in Kyoto, and it was done initially by women, and they became women of loose morals, and it was women were banned from doing it, and it became a men's performance style. But it was very much meant to be a popular style, so that there's a lot of humor in Kabuki, which there's no humor in no humor at all. And Kabuki was about stories that people might know. The thing that when we call something Kabuki, I mean, there's the Kabuki in Washington or whatever it is that at certain moments the action sort of stops and is done in a very stylized way, so that there would be the eyes opening, the expression of surprise or what have you, and someone might be stabbed or whatever in a very slow motion way, and that would be what the term Kabuki as an expression in English usually refers to. But during the rest of the performance, things are moving along quite speedily, and the dialogue is often colloquial, although now less so, simply because it's 19th century and it's a slightly older form of Japanese. But most of the great Kabuki plays are, for the most part, 19th century.
Thank you, Nigel.
There's no Japanese prints. Most of those were based on popular actors over time.
Yes.
Are the majority of the applicants for the Spoleto Orchestra, are they American, or do you have a lot of applicants from overseas?
Well, the majority are American, yes, but there are a lot of foreign applicants and members of the orchestra, and they're almost always here in a capacity as students, like having had a student visa or a study visa. So a very healthy contingent of people, and that's changed through the years. Many years ago, there was a lot of Eastern Europeans studying in the United States, and now the axis has sort of shifted to the east, so it's more Chinese, Taiwanese, Koreans, but it's quite international. I mean, we do have some people this year from Bulgaria, Russia, England, Canada, and then Korea and China, Japan. Yeah. This is the U.S. premiere of the opera, that's right. Yeah, and it's, this opera received a tremendous amount of buzz in Europe when it premiered for it being so ravishingly beautiful. And very, very well received. Oh, in Brussels, yeah.
And this is a new cast?
This is a new cast, yeah. We put together a new cast and a new production. And that's actually an important point in that the original production was directed by a choreographer, Sasha Waltz, and she has a dance company. And so she integrated her dance company into the production in a rather busy way, frankly, from having seen, you know, it's beautiful in its way, but it's also quite busy. And I think it's important to make clear that this is not an opera ballet. Some people thought that it was composed that way somehow, and it's not. So, yeah.
Well, I have a policy of always ending very punctually, so that this is a lunch hour.
Okay.
So unless there are any more questions, I might do that. I'd like to say that Kepler last year that you conducted was my absolute favourite event at Spoleto, and you made the music absolutely beautiful and enrapturing, if that's a word. And so I can't wait to hear Matsukaze. And in fact, I attempted to block book 11 tickets, but there are so few seats left that I had to spread them around the auditorium. So you all need to buy your tickets very soon. And this has been a real privilege. Thank you very, very much indeed.